Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 87 of the Retro Rents Retro Gaming Podcast. This is a super special episode for me and for Nick. If you've been listening to the podcast, especially since the early days, you will know that this guest, the special guest that we've kept secret until we recorded the episode, is one I have been just dying to get on the show and talk to. And I don't even want to spoil the surprise right now, to be honest with you. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to send you all into the episode with a guest I've been wanting to talk to since I first picked up a computer. I'm really excited. I hope you all enjoy it as much as we did. Nick and I could not have had more fun. And can't wait to hear what you all think about it. Enjoy the episode and our secret special guest. Hello, down low, but we hope you enjoy the surprise. Say hello, Mr. Garriott.
Hello, everybody. Yes, this is Richard Garriott, known to some of you old-time gamers as Lord British, also.
Oh my gosh, this is so surreal, so surreal. Well, I want to be very, very conscious of your time. We, have a list of questions and stuff we'd love to talk to you about, and we'll just get rolling on that.
Yeah. Obviously, we have a lot of things we can talk about. I mean, it's interesting. I've had, as you well know, I've had sort of multiple concurrent, careers, you might call them, or activities, you might say, from game development to exploring the planet and off the planet to, all kinds of other adventures. So yeah, let's talk about anything you'd like. I feel very lucky that in my throughout my time as a game developer, I've used the income I've made off of making games to take myself farther and farther into the unknown of the real world. Starting early on with exploring the 7 continents, dugout canoeing down the Amazon or hiking through Africa or Southeast Asia. But then, as I got more serious about it, ultimately that led me now to travel. In fact, I'm the only person who has explored the geographic Earth from pole to pole, as well as orbited above it in space. And a year ago this month, dove down to the deepest point on Earth, down to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. So that's my one unique exploring, quadruple, you might say.
That blows my mind, and this is actually hopping around the sheet, so it's the order doesn't really matter. But you're hitting on something that's very near and dear to me. One of my favorite Amazon Prime movies is Man on a Mission: Richard Garriott's Journey to the Stars. Is there going to be a Richard Garriott's Journey to the Deeps?
No, we didn't actually take a film crew with us on that one, and and what's interesting is, I was the 483rd person to leave the Earth. So it's, on the one hand, it's a small number, but it's not a super small number.
Right.
And obviously people have been going to space for 50 years, but for going to the deep, the first submarine that went to the bottom was called the Trieste, and it carried Don Walsh and Jacques Piccard. Don Walsh is a friend of mine here at the Explorers Club. Then, only 20 years ago, the second vehicle made it to the bottom, and that was carrying James Cameron, the filmmaker. And then there's only been one other vehicle that's made it to that depth, and that's the vehicle I went in, which is called Limiting Factor, built by now friend of mine, Victor Vescovo. And so he can now make repeated dives into the full ocean depth anywhere on the planet. And so I became the 15th person to make it to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. So obviously that's a much smaller list.
Yeah. Like, what were you feeling? That had to be like simultaneously mind-blowing, nerve-wracking. Like what were you feeling when you reached the bottom? Like
Well,
what was that
well,
moment like?
well. What's fascinating is being in a submarine and being in a space capsule are quite similar in the sense of
Mhm.
it's you're in a capsule in both cases, and the life support things issues are basically the same. Scrub CO2, add oxygen, keep the pressure close to 1 atmosphere. But in a spacecraft, the hard part is getting off the gravity well of the Earth. So it takes this giant rocket to push the capsule into space. In
Right.
the case of going to the deep, the capsule itself is subjected to 1,000 atmospheres of pressure. A space capsule only has to keep in 1 atmosphere of pressure. 32 pounds per square inch, and so a space capsule is not much thicker than a Coke can. On the other hand, to go to the deep, you have to keep out over 1,000 times atmospheric pressure, and so the vehicle
Oh,
is 9 centimeters thick of titanium, honed
wow.
into a perfect sphere, and even with that, it still is crushed by about half a centimeter. And so I put up a little digital tape measure on one side that we kept running as we got down to the bottom and showed that in fact it does get shorter by about a centimeter, half a
Wow.
centimeter. And so you're just going like, yep, if this goes bad, this is going to go really bad, really fast.
Really bad.
And but it's engineering is pretty reliable, so things went well.
Oh, that is so awesome. Yeah, I remember following that on Twitter pretty closely, and it was just wild seeing like the adventure itself kind of unfold, and when you all finally came back, it was just like I think a lot of people that follow you were just like, collective sigh of relief. That's awesome.
Yeah, but there's always lots more fun things to do. I was actually meant to be. I don't know if my exploration hero is a guy named Ernest Shackleton, and an expedition did.
Yes, they found endurance.
Yeah, did. And that's both exciting, but also I'm a little bit sad because I was actually meant to be on that expedition, and
Oh no.
sadly, as COVID restrictions to the number of people on board the ship, came out, I got my position got bumped.
Oh man. That's a bummer. I've been following that whole thing on History Hit TV, like following Dan Snow's documentary of it. And I just remember when the news broke last week, it was like, oh my God, they actually found it. Like, how often do you see that, like on a documentary where they're following or looking for something like this and they actually find it? I thought that was really, really wild. But yeah, Shackleton is just a hero.
Yeah, and so
Absolutely.
yeah, we were actually. I'm here at the Explorers Club right now. I'm president of the Explorers Club, and up here in New York. And we were actually sitting around going, okay, well, what's the next big find? And the one
Right.
that has still eluded people who have spent a lot of time and money chasing is Amelia Earhart's airplane that is lost in
Ooh.
there. So there is still another big one out there that has yet to be found, but I know people around here are working on it, so we'll see.
Oh, that is wild. That is wild. You were talking earlier, about your game, your game career, and then and starting out, in programming and development that kind of fueled this thirst for exploration. When did you realize like that was your avenue to create and eventually use that to get, elsewhere? Where was that first moment, if you can remember, where you're like, I can
Oh
do
no.
this. This can be a thing.
Yeah, well, so what's interesting about it is, of course, I go back to literally the beginning of the industry. I mean, truly.
Mm.
And and so when I started making games, I was making them, I wrote 5 or 6 years of simple little, games for myself, before any were published. And
Mhm.
even the first one that got published, a Calibeth, wasn't written to be published. It was just another one that I was just doing for my friends. And
Right.
and so when a publisher called me up and said, "Hey, we'd like to distribute it across the country," I was like, "Well, that's fun. So sure, of course." And and the first royalty check I received was about triple my father's income as an astronaut. And
Oh
so we
wow.
were like going like, "Wow, that's pretty cool. Maybe I should make another one of these." And so, but it wasn't until really about Ultima 2. In fact, it was pretty much explicitly Ultima 2 when I was at school. I was still attending the University of Texas, and as my income level was going up, my grade point average was going down, and so it was clear that one of these two things had to end, and I really, frankly, wasn't that interested in completing my degree, and I absolutely was interested in continuing to make games, And so I had this, heart to heart, talk with my parents that I thought was going to go badly. About, hey, I'm thinking about dropping out of school to go play games for a living. And when I did, they were like, well, yeah, of course. I mean, this is the opportunity right now is so vast that of course it's the right thing to do for now. But when this windfall ends, when this computer gaming thing runs its, course and things settle down to make it more like a mature, normal business, well, then you can go back to school, finish your degree, and get a real job. And of course, that never happened. But it was really sort of right around there. Ultima 2 was sort of when I kind of went, wait a minute, I don't need to. I don't, this is a career. This is a completely valid way to make a living. This is an industry that is now growing, that is not just going to wink out and disappear. This is a permanent new thing.
It's incredible to me that your parents had such great foresight to encourage that. I mean, you hear stories all the time where back in that day people thought this was going to be something that quickly disappeared and not something to bet the farm on. But because you started so early, you really achieved a lot of firsts. I mean, I've done some reading and I've kind of been able to verify it, but not sure. But like, Akalabeth was the first computer role-playing game that was published and commercially sold, right?
I believe that's the case, yeah.
And
then it goes, yeah. Then I would go on and say, Ultima 2. It was really the first published game in a box. Definitely the first dragon at like a cloth map. Ultima 4 introduced the word avatar, which has now become ubiquitous. Ultima Online not only was the first massively multiplayer game, but also coined the term MMO or MMORPG. The Ultima Online is also the first place you saw, limited edition digital objects selling for, large amounts of money. And, that's in my mind the precursor of NFTs. And, so I feel really lucky that we did get the chance to kind of set standards. And what I find funny about some of those standards we set is how many of them have gone way outside of games, and people have lost sort of the history. And so let me tell you one of those that I happen to think is pretty funny. I don't know if you are familiar with the term shard in context of a server farm, a duplicate of a server set of data.
Atlantic all the way, baby.
Yes, and so what's funny is I meet people who've never been involved in games at all, but are people that do databases, global databases, and they'll have a database in Europe and a database in the United States, and they keep them synchronized, and they call those two synchronized server sets for short ping times. They call them shards. And I'm going like, well, do you know where that name comes from? And they're going like, no, not at all. And I'm going, well, it really comes from Ultima Online. And and I explained that when we first were doing Ultima Online, we didn't expect to have multiple servers. We thought we were just making one world that would hold about 10,000 people in it, 10,000 active users, which would mean 1,000 at a time playing. And but the game, it would be once we did the beta test, it became so obvious that we were going to need multiple servers. That was good in the sense of the game selling a lot, but I found it fictionally bad because I was going like, I didn't want, if you started in a new world, that meant you wouldn't see your friends in the other worlds, and that meant that this world would evolve differently than another server set. And so I made a piece of fiction that goes back to Ultima 1, where Mundane, the evil wizard, was immortal due to the existence of a magical gem of immortality. And he shattered the way you killed him in Ultima 1 was destroying the Gem of Immortality, which broke it into shards. And each of those shards took a copy of the world as it was at that moment. And so even though the metaverse or the multiverse that you were playing in for Ultima Online was separate shards, in theory, those shards could be reunited and simplified back into a single playable world. And so that was the fiction that I set up to make myself feel okay about the multiple realities. And so that's where the word shard came from. And now it's used in databases all over the world with no one having any idea where the word came from. And it's really a piece of Ultima fiction that I wrote in high school.
That is so funny. My manager and I were talking about UO the other day, and just how big of a formative moment that was for us in gaming. Like, I'm approaching my 4th decade, so I was here to experience a lot of the stuff that you created and the classic game creators at the time. But I remember when I was in I think it was the beta for UO, and this is going back quite a few years, there was nothing quite like this at the time, where like the closest single player experience I had to this was Ultima 7, where the world felt alive. And I remember, and this might be my mind playing tricks on me, but I think initially in Ultima Online there was meant to be this like ecosystem of like animals that would like actually have a population. And like, did I remember right? Like the players made them go extinct.
No, you're quite correct. And so, but let me tell you the story of that, because it's sort of a cautionary tale for game developers since, which is, we thought, and by the way, I love your reference to Ultima 7, because that really was our target. Ultima 7 was the best realized virtual world,
so great,
breathing world that we did. So it's still one of the ones I reflect on the most positively. And for Ultima Online, we said, okay, we're not going to be able to create quest lines fast enough to keep everybody busy. So we need some form of automatic quest generation. And so our approach to that was to do a self-sustaining virtual ecology. And so what we meant by that, and what we implemented, and was implemented during the beta and even during the launch, but you'll see what happened here. So in the beta, we made it to where grasslands, the actual tile that was grass, produced a vegetation item, effectively, that herbivores that were spawned into the world would consume. And so if you turn this on, herbivores would multiply across the globe and generally fill the grasslands to the maximum capacity of those grasslands to feed them. And then we introduced carnivores. And the carnivores would spawn, they'd be up in the mountains or something. The wolves, we'll call it wolves and sheep in this case, but we had even more than just these two, but they were good examples. And the wolves would come down out of the mountains looking for meat. They would find the sheep, and they would eat the sheep down to below the maximum they could in the grasslands. But this would find a balance, because if the wolves ate all the sheep, then they wouldn't have anything to eat, and the wolf population would die down. And so those would self-balance. And then we said, okay, now if we let players come in and they kill off some of the deer and sheep and other herbivores, then those wolves will go farther looking for food, which might include into the town, and they'll start eating the villagers. And then the villagers will be going, help, help, the wolves are attacking. Hey, players, here's a quest for you to go protect us from the wolves that in fact are coming in, maybe because you hunted all the deer out. And so the players would, either help repopulate the deer and or, go hunt the wolves. And we thought, and when we operated this ourselves in a playtest environment with like 6 players in the game total, this worked great. And so we were very proud of our simulated ecology and its ability to spawn quests. And then when we put it out, when we launched it, when you suddenly have hundreds of thousands of players running around, is they actually kill off all the wolves and all the sheep so fast that the virtual ecology has no time to operate. And there was literally no level of spawning we could crank up that would allow the virtual ecology to take root. And so literally no one noticed or cared that we'd put all this time and effort into a virtual ecology, because the ecology was just overrun by by players. And so after maybe a year of trying to figure out a way to make it better, make it do its job in a new or better way, we ultimately gave up and ripped it out. And so it was a lot of time and effort spent on something that players never noticed or cared about.
Did you ever find like players surprised you in other ways that were unexpected?
Oh, all the time. One of my favorites is in the early days, especially, I would always jump into the help queue to watch, what were people having problems with, and one of them was, there was this, we had a real problem of the more sophisticated older players, or more experienced players, would prey on a lot of the younger players. And a lot of that was in kind of humorous, funny ways. Like, for example, people would learn that since the roofs would pop off of buildings as you got inside of them, they could do things like they could go to the bank. The predator players could put a teleporter just inside the bank that teleported you out into the woods. And so if you were coming to the bank with a bunch of treasure, you'd walk into the bank, the roof would pop off, but at that exact moment you'd be standing in teleporter, so you'd be teleported via a teleporter you never saw before out into the woods, away from the protection of the guards of the city, and people would clobber you and take all your money. And so we're going like, okay, that's kind of funny, but we can fix that technically. And then there were others where people would complain that they were just being suckered by people talking to them and convincing them to trust them and go, come out in the woods with me, I won't hurt you. And then of course they gank them. And so there was a woman who was saying, look, here I'm a new player. Somebody keeps stealing all my stuff. If I can't even play this game for 5 minutes, I'm gonna take my money and go home. And I was going like, okay, I'm gonna go help this woman. And so I teleport in, and she tells me how this is the fifth time she's restarted. Every time she walks out of the town, somebody basically zips by on the screen so fast she can't even see them or target them or do anything, and steals all her stuff and then kills her, and this is just not fun. I said, okay, well, I am Lord British. I'm going to escort you out of town myself, and so you will be safe. I will be here for you. And so we walk out of the town together, and right as soon as we get outside the boundary of town, someone zips by so fast that they must have macroed something in a way that I really had no idea how they pulled this off. They zipped by so fast, I couldn't target them to see who they were. They stole all this woman's stuff again, and then ran off the other side of the map. And so I went to this woman and say, stay here, I'll be right back. And so I teleported ahead, waited there for this person to come on screen, froze them while they were on screen, appeared in front of them as Lord British and said, how dare you, thief and scoundrel, rob from this poor player. If you do that again, I'm going to ban you from the game. Let this be a lesson to you. And they were like, I'm so sorry, Lord British. I'm sorry, Lord British. I promise I'll never do it again. I said, okay, let that be a lesson. So I go back to the woman. I give her all her stuff back. And while I'm standing there, zip, same person comes by going the opposite direction. And I'm going like, wait, stay here. Hang on. I go teleport in front of him. I freeze him to the ground. I said, look, hey, that's 2 strikes, dude. Don't do it again. I really am going to, ban you from the game. And he said, oh, I'm so sorry. I thought it was funny. I said, it wasn't funny. Don't do it. And he'll get his stuff, take it back. And here comes a person a third time. Third time person comes by. I freeze him. I appear as Lord British. And I said, okay, that's it. 3 strikes. I'm now going to ban you from the game. And the person goes, wait. I said, wait, Richard Garriott. He said, look, you created the rules of this game. You put the feature in the game that allows me to do thieving activities. I am role-playing a thief, just like you are role-playing Lord British. And, and if you didn't want me to be able to steal stuff from people, why the hell did you put the rules in the game that allow me to steal things from people? Of course, if Lord British appears before you, I'm going to swear that I'm not going to do it again, but I'm a freaking thief. So of course I'm going to still do it. And I went, oh man, he's right. And so I then sat back and went, oh, on the one hand, I can't let him prey on this woman because, we need new players to be able to play. So I teleported him to the far side of the planet. And so that at least he couldn't prey on this particular woman at this particular moment. I then went and brought the stuff back to the woman, made sure she had to find time at least for this particular day of her life. And then as a team, we went back and sat down and said, what do we do about this? How do we both let people have the fun that we think that this sort of behavior might be, but how do we also protect the newer players from becoming fodder and leaving the game before they really learn how to use it?
I remember, like, that. You bring up such a great example. I think what made UO very special, because, like, especially the early days, there was really nothing separating, good role playing behavior and like somebody role playing an evil character. You like venturing outside of town, as it probably would have been in a medieval fantasy era, is not safe to do alone. But when you got a group together and you got some friends, you could do some really interesting things. I remember we kind of got caught in a bit of a scandal by pretending to be Britannian tax collectors. I think if I remember, the guy that ran our guild called us the Britannian Tax Collectors Guild. And we would just walk up to random players and be like, we've looked at the transactions from your vendor and how much gold you've taken into your house or castle, and you owe us blah 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 in taxes. And sometimes people would give it to us, and I'll never forget it. We got reported, and we said, look, like I remember sitting like talking, typing out to this person that like we were facing a ban, and I remember saying like, we never represented that we were, employees of Origin or anything like that. We are role playing that we are tax collectors, and we're actually lying. And people were, just giving us money. And I felt bad because I remember they were flooding the boards like, how dare you collect taxes, Origin? This makes no sense. And I remember we finally just kind of stopped doing it because I felt like we were towing some line, but no other game allowed for that. Like, I don't know. UO was something special.
Yeah, and so no, I quite agree. And and what's unfortunate is, as magical as those times were, it's been very hard to consider how to reproduce it. And because part of its greatest success also became part of its limitation, and in that. For every person who has one of these Wild West stories that are fun, like what you're saying, I mean, you really weren't. I mean, people were doing it voluntarily, right? It was but
right.
you were sort of acting like a scammer, in the sense of, you were doing some phishing, and people would, PH phishing, and people would occasionally pay it because they believed it. It's ransomware, etc. And so. And so the person who's on the receiving end, of course, doesn't think there's that much fun. And there's usually more people on the receiving end than on the doling it out end, kind of.
Yeah, for sure.
And so that really did make it to where we sort of had a peak hardcore audience. The general public that weren't this savvy, lightning fingered. Manipulators of the system, had a much harder time, really embracing it deeply. And then, and as we tried to make it safer, that killed the fun off of the hardcore player. So it's a really difficult thing to balance how to do that.
Yeah.
And keep everybody happy.
Yeah. We wound up playing well after like the Tramel Feluca split. God, we played that for years, but I'd love to go back a little bit because we've started talking about Ultima 7, which is absolutely one of my favorites. How you really? I remember the game itself really pushed the technology for the time to the point where I think you had like implemented your own memory manager to get this to work, but like. What for you made Ultima 7 something special that really separated it from anything else?
Well, let me touch on the Voodoo memory management system. Yeah, so let me mention that, and then I'll go.
That's what it was.
Yeah, I'll talk about the game design, what I thought was special about it. But yeah, this was in the early days of the PC standard, so the Microsoft Windows PC standard, and the operating system, which was probably still DOS at the time, might have been an early version of Windows. But everyone's computer had a minimum of a megabyte of memory in it, but the operating system could only address the first 640K. And so 1/4 of the memory of the computer that everyone had was not usable because the operating system didn't allow it to be addressed. And so we said, look, with a 25% bonus of memory, which might even be a 1/3 bonus of memory once you get the operating system stuff that everybody has to have, out of the way. We could cram a lot more into the game than most people could do without it. And so we wrote a hack to DOS to allow us to page in that last section of RAM on demand, and it worked great. The only problem is that Microsoft independently later released either Windows or whatever their next operating system was, and they fixed it themselves to where it was addressable. And that actually broke our memory manager. And so anybody that already was using our memory manager, anybody that bought the game prior to the new operating system, suddenly the game didn't work, and that kind of happened during the middle of its life cycle as a published game. So it actually caused us trouble, and we took a lot of heat for this crazy voodoo memory management system that suddenly doesn't work. And we're going like, well, it did when we published it. It's not our fault. It's Microsoft. But the thing I think that made the game special was this singular devotion to the completeness of the simulation of the reality that we were in. And that goes way beyond kind of the roles and responsibilities of characters, and it goes way beyond even the fact that every character in the world had its own life cycle. They would wake up in the morning and go to work, and in the afternoon go to the pub, in the evening come back and have dinner with their families, etc. But we also made them to where the good guys weren't always good, they weren't infallible, and bad guys weren't always intractably bad. And and we made it to where the evil character, the Guardian, it was instead of just waiting for you at the end to kill you or to fight you when you became powerful, he was an active member of the plot. And so if you would manage to turn one of the members of the bad guys to your side, and the Guardian found out about it, which of course we helped make sure happened, was always the case, the Guardian would then go and kill that person. And so we made you feel bad for convincing somebody to do good. And likewise, someone who is fundamentally good might ultimately be bribable to turn to bad. And so the richness of not just the simulation, but the way the simulation could change based upon your interaction with it, I think was far better than any other game before, in many cases since. But also it's an interesting case of it's one of the three games that I think fits the following importance, which is, I think if you look at Ultima 4, Ultima 7, and Ultima Online, which to me are my artistically most successful games, it's interesting to note that in all three of those cases, my family, the company, and my employees all thought I was making a terrible mistake by pursuing it. And,
oh, wow.
In the case of Ultima 4, it's because I was making this goody-goody two-shoes games that was going to judge you as to whether you were doing good. And that was right on the heels of Ultima 3 being the first game we published as Origin. So it was the first time I got fan mail. And that fan mail all said, the way I love to play your game is by murdering all of the town folk and stealing from all the shops. And I was about to go, that's not cool. You're supposed to be the good guy. And so that's when I came up with the word avatar, that this is you in that body. It's not your evil sidekick. This is you in that form, in that body, inside my virtual world. So if you do good or bad deeds, you, Earth human, are responsible for those good or bad deeds. And I forced you to live the goody-goody two-shoes life. And my family was like, Richard, this is stupidity. People have been writing you, telling you how much fun they're having being basically the bad guy, and you're about to force them to be the good guy. No one's going to like this. And I was like, I really feel this is the right thing to do. And Ultima 4 became the first number one best-selling game in the series. And the same thing was true for Ultima 7. People thought it is incredibly expensive to do that level of simulation. And most games, even lots of really great games. I think if you look at a lot of the Blizzard games like Diablo or World of Warcraft, they are masters of the challenge and reward cycle. But it is largely level grinding, right? You get a little stronger, you fight things that are a little stronger, you get a little better treasure, and you have a level gated fence around you that lets you open up the world as you level up. But it's really the same game mechanic used throughout the game experience. And here I was doing this simulation that required an immense amount of hand tweaking at a very large area of the work. So it was super time consuming and expensive, and everybody thought this is just stupidity. No one's going to care. And again, Ultima 7 I think was a big one on the map. And then of course with Ultima Online, the same sort of thing where people going like, no one's ever made a massively multiplayer game before. There's no way to predict it has any sales, so we don't have faith that it will sell because no one's ever made one that did sell. And we were like, that those days are gone. The World Wide Web is here. Now is the time to do it. And we ultimately did, and it became the fastest selling PC game in Origin and EA history at the time.
Yeah, that level of foresight's incredible, especially like jumping into pretty much unknown waters at the time. And then all of a sudden, UO becomes this massive hit. Like, when did y'all realize like UO was such a huge success?
Right with the release of the beta test, and but we knew that our detractors were wrong from the very earliest time. When we built a little prototype for ourselves, and that prototype really was just a in-house game on our local area network, where you had a character running around on a map, and we had basically what I'll call the football. We had an object that one person had that the others didn't. And as you ran around in this game, all you had to do was bump into somebody else, and then you had the football. And then you'd all run away, and that person would then run away from everybody else, and people would chase him down, and with whoever bumped into him next would get the football. And that was it. But that was already so fun, and there wasn't even a game there. But it was really, but it was already the first of its kind, right? I mean, there were not people doing real time, direct engagement across the internet before this. But even that little test made us go, this is going to work. It's going to be a great game. People are going to have a blast. And so that's when we kind of pushed to get it going. But then in this case, the Electronic Arts, sales machine got involved and said, well, there's no sales comparables out there. So we're going to tell you it's not going to sell, no matter what it is you ship.
Oh, that's so funny. And who turned out to be right there? That was all you guys.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to shift with the time we have left to your exploration,
Sure.
and this adventurous life you took after game development. And like, is that something you always knew you wanted to do, and this was a path to it, or is this something that you came to kind of later in your game development career, or is this something you wanted to do from day one?
Wanted to do from day one. I mean, my early childhood memories of like family vacations, like we did the classic. I mean, literally with a station wagon, we packed the family into it, 4 kids, 2 parents. We pulled behind the station wagon a pop-up camper, and we did the around the United States and into Canada tour when I was in junior high or so. And even on that on that little family vacation, or big family vacation, I would do things like gather matchbooks out of the cafes we would stop in to get food, and then if there was a cave or a culvert or anything else that I could go explore, I would get out that pack of matches, or fistfuls of packs of matches, and go explore myself with matchlight. And and from those little beginnings, it got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And so I've been rock climbing, rappelling, exploring caves, especially in those early days, as much as I could. And the only thing that's really changed is sort of the scope of them. And so the biggest things I could do, actually prior to joining the Explorers Club that I'm talking to you from right now, and I happen to be the president of, the Explorers Club was formed in 1904 by the early heroic age explorers that were looking to try to find the North Pole, South Pole, the top of Everest, surface of the moon, bottom of the deep. And when I joined this in the 90s, suddenly I met like-minded entrepreneurs who really wanted to go to the most extreme places possible. And so we began to actually build companies to open up those frontiers. And so I helped build companies that opened up the ocean depths. I helped build companies that operate on the interior of Antarctica, if you want to go meteorite hunting or go to the South Pole. I missed out on, one of my partners did the first nuclear icebreakers to the North Pole. Now that's not uncommon, but the point is that allowed me to go do all those things. And it also allowed me, by virtue of helping to build the X Prize, Zero G Corp, and Space Adventures, it allowed me to be one of the first private citizens to fly into space. And so it allowed me to live on the International Space Station for 2 weeks. And again, that's all through things we nucleated or grew, right here in the Explorers Club.
Oh, man.
So kind of along with that, I mean, obviously you're starting up all these companies, but even as kind of on a global level, like we're seeing a lot more commercial companies, and even countries themselves getting more involved with exploration and more specifically like getting into space. What do you see the future of space flight and be it travel, maybe within the next century? What do you think that's going to look like?
Well, I'm a little biased in the sense of I've been at commercial space now for a long time, and I have investments in a number of the companies. But I am a huge Elon Musk fan,
For sure.
and an investor in all of his companies that I can figure out a way to invest in. And so my largest personal holding is in SpaceX. And
Nice.
and I just 2 weeks ago was down in Boca Chica, Texas, crawling around in their manufacturing and launch facilities there. And it is incredibly impressive, their new Starship. And when they talk about the fact that they believe that they'll be able to get it down to something like a couple thousand of low thousands of dollars to go point to point anywhere on Earth, and only in the tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars to literally go visit another planet. They're targeting 2 orders of magnitude of cost reduction, and what they're doing down there is really to build a rocket that that is so reusable that they can catch it out of the air with their little chopstick tower and refuel it and launch it the next day. So literally, basically zero refurbishment, just like a passenger airliner. And
That's incredible.
And if you get down to passenger airliner reusability, it's if you look at any other form of transport, cars, planes, boats, trains, all the others where you just go refill it with the tank, fill up the tank of gas and keep going, they all cost to operate only about 3 times the fuel. So if you put $100 of gas in your car, you spend another $200 on depreciation and maintenance. And that's true for cars, boats, planes, and trains, but not rockets. Rockets are more than 100 times that right now, because generally you're throwing away a heck of a lot of it, if not all of it, on its maiden voyage. And so if they really get true reusability in this way, then they're right. Those prices are where you get.
You see yourself taking a return trip to space?
Unquestionably. I mean, that's really why I put the money into it in the first place. And I made the investment not to make money. I made the investment so I can go.
Sure. Yeah. What was just speaking of that? I mean, again, I've probably watched Man on a Mission 10 times now because it was just such an incredible journey to follow as you trained and went to the space station. What were some of your favorite moments on the space station?
Well, actually, I have one particular favorite that I think is fun to mention, or sort of my strangely proud moment was, everyone who goes to fly on the space station has to train on every piece of equipment you might need to interact with. And that's, among other reasons, first it's a safety issue, but it's also an issue that, you don't want to have to tap another busy professional on the shoulder and go, "Hey, I forgot how to operate the radios. Could you help me out here?" Right? And because that would take time and away from another really expensive, experiment or activity that's going on aboard the space station. And so when we got up there on the space station, one of the more complicated systems is in fact the radios. And it's not that using a radio to call the ground on its own is particularly complicated, because it's not. It's basically the same as a ham radio that anybody can get a license for, on the internet these days. But the intercom system that connects to it is a bunch of interconnected panels from every module of the space station. The space station has been built over 20 years, and so those intercom modules aren't all the same. And so there's older ones and newer ones that are similar but have some changes. And so if you're going to use the radios and the intercoms, there are places where they bridge between each other that are particularly complicated. And if you just switch one switch inadvertently, you can sort of shut down the communications through the stack, much less to the ground. And even though I had learned this very well, my crewmates came to me soon after we got on the space station and said, "Hey, Richard, you're going to be here for 2 weeks and then you're leaving. We're going to be here for 6 months. And so please don't change the configuration of the radios, because if you did and then you leave and we don't know what you changed, it might take us a long time to figure it out." And I went, that actually makes perfect sense. I will not touch the radios. And I'll if I need a reconfiguration, I'll have you do it so you know what was changed. And halfway through my flight, I was, walking or floating through the hallway, I saw my crewmates staring at one of these panels that was the bridge had failed on, and they were trying to figure out how to reconfigure it to bring the radio systems back online. And so I just paused and I was watching them deliberate, and I realized what the problem was. And so I actually just reached over their shoulder, reached the panel, flipped one switch, everything was now back in working order again. My crewmates looked at me and went, we told you about don't touch the radios. Forget that. Touch them all you want. There you understand the configuration issues. And so to me, I mean, it's a weird little tiny moment, but it's one of those things where I'm going like, I was really a useful team member. I knew, I trained hard, I learned well, and I actually had some use beyond my own little set of experiments to be working on.
That is so awesome. Like, yeah, I mean, you really feel like, you're not just up there as a tourist. Like you've contributed. You're running experiments and you've helped solve a problem, which that's amazing. Like that is such a cool thing to be able to walk away from that with. And oh wow, no, that's a really cool story. For sea exploration now, I as I know we're coming down to the 10-minute mark here, but with the when did you decide like that was the next thing you wanted to do? Was that something always in the works, or is this?
No, I would actually say it was opportunistic. So one of my partners in the X Prize, Zero G Corp, and Space Adventures, there was for us the big prize was space, but that took a long time. That took 20 years to figure it out, and so during that 20 years, we're still doing other things, and so. One of my co-founders said, "Hey, I have figured out a way to charter these Russian submersibles, Mir 1 and Mir 2, and the first place we got to go is down to the Titanic." And this was literally at the same time James Cameron was getting ready to film the movie Titanic, and using these exact same submersibles. So if you've seen the movie, you've seen the tools we used, you've seen the ship we were on, you've seen the captain of the boat. It's all the same, and so I was like, "Yeah, I'm all. Let's do it." And so so that was my first deep submersible trip. Obviously, it's a pretty cool one to do first. And
hell yeah!
And then you sort of had the bug, and so then we said, "Hey, well, let's go to. There's another interesting thing to go do. Let's go down to hydrothermal vents, where these creatures are living in high pressure, toxic, anaerobic conditions that might have been the earliest life on the planet." So I'm going like, "Yeah, let's go do that." And then after we did that the first time, it was so obviously of scientific interest that I called my dad, and I actually took my dad out on the next time. We made another set of dives, this time with my father and a bunch of genetic researchers, and we brought up, extremophile life forms and bacteria, and began to pull out, we actually moved. We found at the time the highest surviving temperature bacteria that had been known. So people had already gone over 100 degrees Celsius, previously, but we moved it from like 105 Celsius to 115 Celsius. And now it's actually higher. But we made, serious, real scientific contributions with these dives. And then I began to go, well, let's then we went and did some treasure hunts, and then we did most recently this dive down to the Mariana Trench. So that's sort of been a growing passion. But it was opportunistic. The kickoff was opportunistic.
That's incredible. Just thinking out loud here. Nick, you want to take this next one? This is the question that's itching me.
Yeah, so it's like obviously space, deep sea, North Pole, South Pole. What's next for you, coming up? Like anything you could talk about, or just like something that you're working towards?
Well, of course, I was supposed to be on this this endurance dive trip, rats. But COVID hit another one that was hopefully just delayed, which is we were going to go to a little island called Pitcairn, where the mutiny on the mutineers ended up. I'm glancing over my shoulder here, where I've got my wooden bounty model and my wooden endurance model on a shelf here behind me. So hopefully that won't come up. Of course, I intend to go to Mars and hopefully take my family with me. My wife was not so interested, but I figured if I take the children, she would come. But I think that's still a decade away, probably. But
only a decade, you think?
Oh yeah, I think probably only a decade.
Wow.
Yeah,
it's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, Elon would say sooner than that, but I'm hopefully being a little conservative by saying a decade.
That's just awesome that like this adventurous spirit just continues with all the incredible stuff that you've seen. That Pitcairn sounds really cool. I've done a lot of reading on Pitcairn Island, and they're kind of like their own like community in a way that's just kind of grown independently of almost the rest of the world. Do you plan on chronicling any that trip in any fashion, whether it's a book or?
Well, I'm not sure we'll do a book, but our purpose there, is well beyond just visiting. I mean, in theory, anybody could visit there. I mean, they welcome guests. But the reason we're taking an Explorers Club group down there is to do genetic research on the grave sites of the lineage, starting with the original mutineers. It's obviously been a pretty small gene pool. Only about 50 people currently live there. I think it's at most had 200 or 300 people there, and a lot of the original grave sites now have like houses built on top of them. And so we're going to go there and try to dig up a lot of the old texts and talk to the oldest people of what their earliest memories are, and take out some genetic material in a lot of these grave sites to try to figure out who's buried where and who's related to who.
Sounds so fascinating. Yeah, it's a very interesting community from what I read about, to where like they even almost have their own language. It's a dialect, but it's very unique.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, I have a book on the shelf about Pitcairnese. Exactly what you're referring to.
Pitcairnese.
Yeah, I'm looking at a purple covered book about the language, the unique dialect of the Pitcairn survivors.
Well, I know what's going next on my Kindle. Do you have anything right now that you're doing that you want to promote, whether it's maybe an upcoming project or
well, actually, yeah. So
I'll
just mention one thing here in our last couple minutes, which is that so MMOs now are so big and take so long. I don't think I'm gonna start and lead another project of that scale. That being said, I think there's still now some. We're finally to the point where. Even though Moore's law still, in fact, I need to kind of give a caveat here, which is, one of the things I think happens with computers advancing so fast, as they will have and will continue to do, is it has tended to keep the simplest form of first-person shooters to be the most popular, throughout most of the last few decades. And it's only during periods of stability of a platform did people tend to write deeper and deeper games, more like Ultima 7. And but we're now to the point, machines are now fast enough to where writing the engine is no longer the challenge, and even games that are truly retro in their graphical look are becoming popular again. You don't have to have just all the best bells and whistles. Now people are looking for content, and so I think there's some interesting new opportunities in game making, and so I've been contacted by a lot of people now that are looking at replacing databases with blockchain in order to blend together the what used to have to be done either with a big company funding it or using a Kickstarter or other ways of funding that ultimately then moves into the game funding itself. If you use a blockchain basis, then your funding mechanism is the same as your in-game economy ultimately. And so the point is, I'm signing up to help out on a few projects that are role-playing games that also use some blockchain technologies as part of their funding mechanics. So we'll see how that goes. Those aren't ready to be announced yet, but those are things I'm getting involved in now.
That is super fascinating. I will say, if and when you're ready to talk about those, and as they take off, we'd love to have you back on.
If you see a press release come out in time in the next few months, drop me a line again and we'll dig into it deeper.
Thank you so much, Richard. This has been a real privilege for me, and Nick, obviously, we really appreciate your time, and I can't wait to see what's next for you, because it always benefits the fans like us, no matter what it is.
Well, thank you very much.
It's always
fun. I appreciate it. It's been fun to get a chance to, a rare opportunity to talk to people who are both interested in the exploration side and the gaming side, so fun for me too, so I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Richard. Take care, and we'll be watching.
Hey, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Good one.
Let me tell Craig to leave. Okay.